Hello, everyone. So I called yesterday after the party, the quiz party, a friend of mine, and I said I feel very uncomfortable with my talk. After having a few conversations I had during the party, I was like, why is that? I said, well, I'm not sure if I know who is going to attend this talk and what their expectations are. And it's like, okay, but you've been to Agile On The Beach before. It's like, yes, I have. So I know we'll be engineers, QAs, product owners, product managers from different organizations, and so on and so forth. And we will speak different languages. So why does it make you so uncomfortable? It's like, well, because I don't know. And he was like, okay, so how about your presentation? I said, well, I went through my presentation, and it's like the day before the conference, even though I was looking at that for some time, I see that I would just I would just kill it, and I would just write it from the beginning, and I would add new things, and I think there are so many things missing that those guys can find valuable. And the reason why I'm sharing with you these conversations I had yesterday is that this uncomfortable feeling is what product management is about. We talk with different people internally and externally, speak different languages. We have our own language. I use those kind of terms like LTV, time to market, and so on and so forth. Like they mean the world to me, and they usually mean nothing to people that I talk to. Another thing is that there are so many things I would like to share. The same thing, there are so many things I would like to add to my product. And what I find interesting is that this kind of the fit in between we create the product for our organization and the fit between how we create a product for our customer, there are so many similarities. So what does it mean to create a successful product or to create a successful organization or product team? Is it actually meaningful to talk about the success if we talk a lot about failing fast and what failing fast actually means? I will start with a story. Some of you may already know the story and heard it so many times at different events about Kodak, how they failed and didn't pursue necessarily on time the digital transformation. But there are quite a few things that I find interesting in terms of topic about success. So Kodak was founded 130 years ago, and their main slogan, something that I would call these days a vision, was well, you press the button, we do the rest. It was about quick usage of photography. At that time, we are talking about traditional film photography. And somehow, when in 1975, Steve Sasson, who was the engineer at Kodak, who came with an idea, well, how about we use a slightly different medium, which is digital, and do the same thing? They said no, and exactly what he says, the board said, is like, well, that's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. That's a quote he heard. And that's quite interesting, because if we look at what Kodak was established for in the beginning, this kind of fits the purpose. But instead of that, they decided to pursue and focus on the film industry. They invested in chemistry and so on and so forth. They had a right to do that. They had means to do that. Let's remember that the times when they were evolving very rapidly, we're talking about the First World War, and a lot of large organizations were actually heavily supporting government. So this is kind of another context that is important to think about, why they were so heavily focused on certain industries. But long story short, they missed the opportunity. At the same time, if we look back slightly, in 1935, they launched the first camera, the first camera for the massive market. And what Kodak was back then for the society was, as Google is now for search for us. People were using the term Kodak as to indicate they want to take a quick picture of their friends and family. This is not a new thing that is happening nowadays with Uber me a ride or Google me something about something. They were using this term. So where I'm at is, do we think that digital camera as the film camera as a product that Kodak launched, was it a successful product? Do we consider actually Kodak to be a successful company? if a company is successful, does it mean that they're going to continue releasing only successful products, the products that kick off for a long time and live for a long time on the market? And I think it's a kind of, I will leave it as a kind of an open question, because how we measure success very much differs from the stage of the organization we are at, and something I'm going to share today about how this perception of success differs at a startup and a more established organization, which is far more risk averse, how the product success differs when you're talking about a product discovery and about the product decline and different stages of the product lifecycle. There are so many dimensions and dynamics to consider. So before I move on, I would like to understand and know you a little bit better. So how many product managers, owners do we have here? Awesome. Engineers, QAs, designers, quite a few. Agile coaches, Scrum Masters. Great. Anyone else I didn't mention? Sweet. So, is anyone here who's never worked with product managers? So everybody works or used to work with product managers. Awesome. Brilliant. So, as I have a chance, so recently, I'm quite lucky because quite recently I joined one of the organizations that I used to work for quite some time on an advisor basis to lead their product management function. It's a cybersecurity startup, very different things that I used to do before, because before I was leading search strategy in genealogy. It's a family history. So, but because for the last few years, I was moving in between different organizations. The one thing I had to learn is how to actually come up with better questions rather than answers in the beginning. And it's quite common for product managers that when you join a new organization, the product you work with is not necessarily a new product, and you quickly need to figure out how to manage all the needs and opinions and stakeholders and all the data we have and so on and so forth. So one of the questions that I often ask in the beginning, people around that work with me, is like, guys, so why do you do what you do? Why do you choose to actually work on this particular feature? Why did you go after this particular client? Why did you write the copy in this particular way to announce something and so forth? And this is quite interesting, because when I ask a question, it's like, why do you do what you do currently? I sometimes hear these kind of things, like, well, because my manager requested it, because we have a client who already paid for that, or, well, because our competitors already have it and we want to kind of catch up. So actually, we need to have parity. I don't know how many of you heard about this argument that we want to have a parity and get a similar feature as soon as possible, regardless whether it's actually a good fit to our product. Well, because that's what they pay me to do. And what's interesting, when I ask this question as a kind of a follow-up question, so why do we choose to do what we do? Because an interesting thing in terms of what we do, that there is a choice. It's not always a choice about doing something and not doing something, but understanding the purpose of the work that we are currently following. And what usually happens when I follow up with this question is that there is a silence or a bit of confusion, and answers like, well, I never thought that I have any choice. It's like, well, have you asked your manager why this particular feature or request or change management request is actually so needed? It's like, why would I ask my manager? He asked me to do that. And the very thing that I believe product managers need to be good at is asking really good questions. So one of the things that I realize when I hear this kind of answers is that team around the product does not necessarily have the shared objective, does not necessarily have the feeling of the shared vision, of the shared direction that they can relate to. And that's the problem, because if people don't have the shared purpose, it doesn't matter necessarily which way they go, they just follow whatever is in front of them. So something I'm going to talk about a bit today is the product vision. So if I understood, you all work with product organizations one way or another. How many of you believe that in your organizations you have a strong, established, and clear product vision? Thank you. How many of you feel that there is no product vision? How many of you don't understand the vision that there is? Awesome. Which is not awesome, but. So that's an interesting thing, because moving between and working with different organizations, the first thing when I'm in a role of a product manager that I'm asked about is that, well, you've got 2 weeks or 100 days, whatever the plan is and the timeline, my runway, that you've got this period of time to come up with the roadmap. It's like, okay, I get it, roadmaps are important, so can you tell me a bit more about your product strategy? And can you tell me a bit about your product vision, so I understand the context to relate my product roadmap to? And then it's like, no, we are still figuring out our product strategy, but it does not necessarily matter because this is what the executive team is doing. And we have this market research company actually looking at that. Your focus is to come up with the product roadmap so that the development teams know what's going on and our sales know what to sell, who to sell to, and so on and so forth. And then we have this kind of conversations about, okay, so let's start with the shared language. So, well, we have the product vision, and I will talk about that. We have a product strategy, which is the particular direction we take, and we have a product roadmap. The product roadmap is something that indicates how we are going to execute our strategy. Our main focus in the short, long term, and mid-term, and so on and so forth. And it's quite interesting. And usually we have a few arguments discussing whether they really want the product roadmap, maybe they want a release plan, and so on and so forth. But let's focus on the product vision. And there is a bit of a quiz that I have for you, because I picked up a few vision statements from different companies that you may recognize. So if you do recognize this vision, the company behind this vision, I would like you to shout out or just share. So Amazon, brilliant. Thank you. The second one, I will just read the last one. Today, we are actively developing the technologies to make this possible with the ultimate goal of enabling human life on Mars. Yeah, thank you. And this one, give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Yeah, so that's the latest vision statement that Zuckerberg published, I believe, 3 weeks ago. And a few interesting things that I believe these vision statements have in common. That these vision statements are not about our company. They are not about our product. They are about the future that we are creating for the customers, the impact we want to make on the market. So why this vision is so important? Because first of all, the vision statements, they are supposed to be rather timeless. Whatever timeless means. Probably when we talk about SpaceX and Facebook, we are talking about slightly different period of time. But taking into account that, let's say, in tech, engineers stay on average in London up to 2 years in one company, this is actually a pretty timeless vision, as an example. And what I find also interesting is that these visions need to be feasible and meaningful. And the SpaceX vision in particular indicates that they are not necessarily sure if we can live on Mars in any kind of like near future, but they are developing understanding how to make this possible and feasible potentially with the ultimate goal to make it happen. It's a very different vision statement than the vision statement that Amazon has. And then when we look around at what's going on in the market, let's say, probably most of you know, so Amazon recently acquired Whole Foods. The pretty big thing, and a lot of theories why they did it. And when I look back at Amazon vision, they say, it's like, well, we want to build a place where people can buy anything online. And they bought retail. So how does it actually make sense? Well, the thing is that they do have Amazon food and this kind of deliveries, so they need actually a chain of storage spaces to actually have like a really quick turnaround, and also we talk about stickiness and customer engagement and these kind of things. So this actually all makes sense. And that's what's interesting about the vision. It does not necessarily indicate the solution. It's very solution agnostic. It's very much about the impact we want to make to actually enable and to create this vision for the future. So I might have mentioned that I recently joined a cybersecurity startup, and we are about to start another round of funding. What it means actually is that why it's relevant. It's relevant because the funding indicates how much life we have left potentially until we become profitable as a company. We are not there yet. So the startups work, early stage startups work with the kind of definitions of runways. So you get the first round of funding, and you have like 6 months to prove that there is a problem market fit, that actually people have a certain problem that you wanted to pursue. Right now we are at a slightly later stage where we actually have a few customers, and we are trying to figure out who are the right customers to go after, because the customers we have are so different, their needs are so different, and they will have this choice will have a huge influence on how we build our company, whether we establish and build in some services, or we offer some training, or we don't, and so on and so forth. So we had this conversation about the vision, and what I heard first from the founders is that our vision is to be the cybersecurity data lake. I was like, okay, can you tell me more about that and what it really means to your customers? It's like, well, they can put all the data sources together. If you're not familiar with the concept of data lake, it doesn't necessarily matter. The whole thing is that it was very solution-centric. And then we started going a bit broader and said, okay, so guys, let's look at the market and how this particular market works, what the problems actually exist. And we had conversations about, okay, so we talk about cyber attacks and how hackers communities are different to enterprise communities. And the one very common theme is that hackers communities are extremely collaborative, while large organizations, which are mostly affected by cyber attacks, are actually not collaborating. They are very close. They don't share the knowledge. They don't share there's no kind of shared open security leadership. Is there anything we can do with our platform and our product to actually enable more collaboration between security leaders? I said, okay, that could be the way to do that. We looked at kind of a few different trends. I was like, okay, so what are different trends? Okay, so everybody says, and government is also repeating that there is a shortage of cybersecurity skills. That people don't understand what it means, that people don't find it attractive, and so on and so forth. Because of certain regulations that are now coming up, a lot of retail and other organizations are finally establishing their security teams, but they can't recruit because people don't have skills. So, okay, guys, is there anything we can do to actually create the value in this particular area, to create learning opportunities, to create communities where people actually share the knowledge? So we are still in the position where we're actually evaluating a few different options. But what I want to share is that it's very much about what's in front of us, not what we have. So what is the product manager's focus? And relating to the main topic of my talk. So I often find that product management is very much confused with product development. And because it's important that we have a shared definition, or at least you understand my definition of product management, so product managers very much focus on creating the right product for the company and creating the right product for the right customers at the right value. At the right value, I mean, usually it's a price, but because there are so many different ways sometimes of monetizing products, I would just put value, as price is actually how we perceive value in a given segment. And and where myself and other product leaders focus on is enabling organizations and collaborating with the market and customers in the way that we can together execute and enable the product vision, something that I was talking about earlier. It sounds probably great in theory, and a few things I wanted to share is actually how to spot if your product vision is not strong enough or if there's absence of clear product vision. So a few traps to watch out for. So the first thing, we say that, well, we do need to, products don't exist without customers. We all agree with that. And we need to understand who our customers are, and we do interviews, we do all the kind of quantitative and qualitative thing. We have a lot of great frameworks, tools, jobs to be done, and so on. And I heard that there are quite a few great workshops today at the conference, which is fantastic. And the one thing I wanted to talk about is the context of choosers and users. And in this context, I'm not talking only about B2B versus B2C, which is usually where we think about that. So interesting thing about you probably, how many of you enjoy buying gifts for Christmas or birthdays? Some people do. I find it usually quite painful, and I prefer to buy some experiences and stuff. And I think that's a kind of interesting thing. So even if we talk about B2C and retail, the people who actually play and participate in the platform, they can be choosers or can be users depending very much on the context, on seasonality and so on. So the jobs the same person can actually have within the same product can be different depending on what they want to achieve. And that's not always something that we take into account as product managers, saying like, well, I'm not in B2B, so I don't really have choosers. You do have choosers. Because how we choose products. So we talk about, so crossing the chasm, probably quite most of you actually familiar how you actually put products on the market and so on, and how different people at different stage engage with your product. So, but what actually choosers say potentially? So choosers as innovators, they say, well, these guys are into something. This is great. I love these guys. I don't really understand what they are doing, but I love them, so I'm gonna get this product, I'm gonna invest in it. This is basically very much how seed funding works, that investors invest in the team rather than in the product because product doesn't exist yet. So what happens later? So we're talking about early adopters. And they say, well, yeah, this could work, makes sense, so I will give it a go. So if you ever bought anything or like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and these kind of things, they're probably somewhere here on the left-hand side, is that you believe in the people who created something, or you think that actually this problem makes sense, it could be feasible, and so on and so forth. And there is a chasm. And this very much changes because the focus moves very much onto the pains and problems and things, how they relate to me as the consumer, as a user of the solution, of the product. So as early majority, we can hear it's like, well, this product addresses our pains and problems. Great, which means that I need to have some level of validating that this actually does it. So we need to have a working product. And later on, it's like, well, I can see that this product is helping others with similar problems we experience. And then we can talk about the network value, about the network effect. It's like, how do you actually make the first choosers your fans and your leaders on the market, which is yet another stage. And then we've got the last group, and usually we hear like, well, right, this is a standard, so we kind of need to comply. We don't really have a choice, which is actually not their choice. And why it's important? Because when we talk with different customers, how they choose products, we can hear different kind of statements. And what's important is to know whether these are the customers and whether they are at the stage we want them to be. If you hear feedback that is likely to be given by innovators or laggards, this feedback may not be necessarily the most relevant for our current product development and actually can hurt. So a few things how we use our products, and of course we likely have a lot of analytics if it's an online platform and SaaS and so on. But what we hear is that, well, I can see that, well, I use this product to actually search. So these are some kind of Trustpilot feedback about Skyscanner. So I use this product to search. I use this product to buy something. I use this product to actually compare prices and so on. There are so many different jobs we do, but what we can see, the motivation and feedback we get from choosers and users is very different. So a few reminders to product managers, people who work with the customers, is that why do choosers and users hire our products? And whether these are different people and maybe they are different in different contexts, something to remember about. How do we create the value for them? Know your customer lifetime value. So choosers don't choose once in this industry. Choosers choose continuously. We have subscription models, highly popular, and they choose on a continuous basis. In retail, we've got warranties to actually return a product if you don't like it within a few days. So people choose continuously. So make them choose continuously. It's not just a one-off thing they do. How does our organization engage with choosers and users? Do we have, well, is it our customer success team? Is it our sales? Do you have a product manager who has access to both choosers and users regardless of your business model? Do you have people in the company who own particular type of partnership with a particular group? This is a very important thing because there is a chance that there is a group out there on the market who is involved in your product lifecycle and you don't have any communication channel with. And how our users can become the choosers. So the great thing is that, well, those who use the product, they are and they enjoy the product, they're quite likely to choose this product when their position changes. So we probably experience that if we work on organizations and we use certain tools that we really value. It doesn't have to be software tools, it could be a practice. We are more likely, and we see the benefits of it, we are more likely to use the same tool and recommend it in the next organization we go to or in the next situation we are to. So how can we turn our users to be the choosers in the future and extend this value? So the next thing, we talk about empathy. So I talk about the market side. It's about customers, users, community partners, and we believe probably that it's so important to understand their needs, what they need, not what they want, what's their context, what their jobs and problems and so on. But how much work do we, and how much time do we invest as product managers to try to understand the needs of our organization? And here I will talk about who is in the product team. One of the kind of concepts that I had to digest in a bit and kind of feel comfortable with is that regardless the structure, regardless the size of the organization I'm in, I belong to many different teams doing what I do. I belong to the product management team, I belong to the product development team, in many situations I belong to the executive team, I belong to the research team and so on, because we have certain types of objectives. And when I talk about a product team, I mean there is everybody who is contributing to enabling the product vision, not just product development team, and how to make them involved in the whole process. So I found that actually working with stakeholders, whoever stakeholders are, is probably one of the most painful and challenging relationships that product managers face. And that's one of the areas that I will explore a bit more. A few notes on that. If we talk about stakeholders, I mean anyone who is keeping stakes in the company, not necessarily shareholders. So these are two different concepts. I hope they are like, are they clear for everyone? Sweet. So I'll have a stakeholder, sales manager. How many of you had a chance to work with really great sales managers and directors? Awesome. How many of you had a chance to work with really poor, in your opinion, sales managers or directors? How many of you never worked directly with salespeople? Quite a few. Okay. So there are a few things. So salespeople are good at selling. Product managers are good at product managing. Engineers are good at engineering and so on. But there is more to that. Salespeople are extremely charismatic. Great salespeople are extremely charismatic. They are great at asking questions, they are great at active listening, and they can connect very quickly with the customers. And their objective is to close the deal, to close the right deal for the company. But to close the right deal, they need to understand what the right deal is in terms of what they are connecting in terms of the product services with the customers. And that's not always obvious. So a few quotes that I heard from kind of sales managers is like, well, you know, guys, this is super embarrassing because we always have delays with initial setup at the client. Whatever we do, we are always delayed. You give me time frames and it never works. And we need something big to close this key client. This is our strategic client. Can you tell me where is AI, artificial intelligence, in your roadmap? Another one, I need this feature to close the deal. The prospect is ready to pay premium. And if somebody tells me that's great because they want to pay, it's like, no, it's not great. I had a client who was ready to pay for 2 development teams upfront 2 years so that we were able to actually deliver something particularly for them. It was a lot of money actually in terms of our P&L and the revenue I had to generate with the platform. Would actually close my year in the middle of a year. The challenge was if I agreed to do that on their terms, that would mean that all the other big clients would start leaving my platform because I would be preferential. And I said, like, no, what you're proposing that you want to be investor in our product. And if you want to be an investor in this particular case, you would need to pay far more than actually developing the features. Sometimes it's great if they want to pay premium, sometimes it's not. So, an interesting thing, so as product managers, we use those kind of different tools, like empathy maps, for instance. So how about we try to use some of these tools to, like personas and others, to understand our stakeholders and take a deep breath and say, like, hey guys, so what do you really mean when you're complaining that this is super embarrassing and we always have problems? So what they can think, and actually had this conversation with one sales manager last week. It's like, well, the thing is that I don't understand what we do. It's like, how am I supposed to build this relationship? I don't understand what guys you're doing really here. I don't know what's going on. I don't have visibility. It's like, I feel frustrated because I'm losing credibility in this industry. If you work with senior salespeople, what they bring to the organizations, they bring network, they bring contacts. And they are very peculiar about their personal brand, and they want their personal brand to become the brand of the company. But we need to help them to create that. Another thing is, I need something to follow up with the prospect, and nobody cares. I need to give something because they feel that we are disengaged, and nobody is giving me any visibility, any understanding what's coming next. So I will go and research on the market what's going on, and I will say, like, yep, we are going after this data science, AI, big data, and other things, and we'll make it happen because we have so much cash already closed. It's like, we are unreliable. This whole process is completely unpredictable. It's very common to actually say people don't understand what the process is around. They find it very confusing. They find it very changing, very chaotic. And what they hear? Well, they hear from us sometimes, I mean us as product development people, it's like, well, it's not possible in this right time frame. That's the ending of the conversation. Or what customers want is not what they need. Yep. Yeah, we say that to close many conversations, guilty as charged. So the thing is that, well, these are not their customers. These are our customers. These are our users. These are also my customers and my users. So actually having a conversation with a sales manager or any kind of other stakeholders that's going for a coffee, whatever the right setup is, not necessarily a kind of a closed meeting space. It's like, can you explain me what is the problem with this customer, with this particular customer? And they usually can say, it's like, well, I really want to close them, but I'm concerned to commit to anything because we constantly have delays. It's like, okay, so why do we have delays? It's like, because you guys come and their environment is not ready and you're not ready. It's like, so how about we get engineers or some technical consultants to come with you to the pre-sale so they can investigate whether this environment is the right environment for our product. Because otherwise we will be constantly customizing and will kill our product and it will kill this relationship, and it doesn't work for none of the sides. And what they see as well is that, well, they see competitors who launch these kind of new, big, shiny things. And they have no idea how we react to these kind of changing realities. Whether we want to pursue that, or we will already have that, or maybe we say that this is not a good fit, we don't share this information. The one thing I could say is, like, if you've never shared your roadmap and your product strategy with salespeople, please do that. because these are really amazing people to work with as soon as we try to understand what they are good at and how to use that for the product advantage. So a few things just to sum up, dear product managers. So do learn about the pains and gains of your stakeholders. We've got so many great tools that we can use not only to understand our customers, but also who we work with. Facilitate shared product language. One of the sessions that I do regularly with the startup is that I talk about things like product vision and what other companies have as product visions, what are great examples and what are not necessarily great examples and what they mean. And I encourage other people to do the same. So we have similar sessions about security, about different security frameworks. What cyber attacks like ransomware or WannaCry really mean. Because I hear this stuff and I go to events and people ask me, I don't understand this language. This is not my native industry. Do encourage this kind of knowledge sharing, even if these are basic things. And remember, we are still employing and getting new people on board. So do that kind of continuously. And provide context for the product decisions. If we can't do that within the time frame, what does it really mean? Because we are doing something else that is providing more value, or because what you ask me for is actually going to take a bit more and it's far more complex, or maybe what you ask me for is the solution, and where the problem lies is in a very different space. So do provide a context. One thing I didn't mention here is that if you are involved in any way or not involved in the employee onboarding, and if your product, we do this kind of thing around product onboarding, the user onboarding, which is super important to activate users on our products to make sure that they initially engage. The one thing I would suggest, if it's possible, is to include some initial product onboarding experience in your employee onboarding experience, so people can actually touch your product and start breathing your product from the very beginning. There is the phrase about dog fooding, very kind of popular, particularly in tech companies in Silicon Valley. This is very important. Whatever the industry you work with, make people feel the product, both the pains and gains, so they can feel that they are creating that and they are part of that. So, prioritization trap. I won't talk a lot about that, because I know that Ozzy later on have a session about cost of delays, and she will be exploring this topic a bit more. But a few things. So in terms of different meetings, any type of prioritization meetings are the meetings that I found the most painful. And there's a funny thing about prioritization. Why is it so painful? It's like, well, because we are talking about many different options and we are talking about choice. And there is such a thing like paradox of choice that economist Schwartz in 90s, 80s, American economist was writing about. And what he states is that, well, there is a particular amount of choice regarding in a particular context that make people happy. So we come to a meeting with probably a few different stakeholders, our teams, and everybody has ideas. And we need to choose from that. We speak a different language, so it's very difficult to actually correlate those things together. And people don't necessarily like making choice if there's too much choice. People don't like making choice if it's too little choice in their perspective. And there are emotions. So this product, as far as I know, they removed it from the market last year, because I was checking that. But I'm showing this product not because of the feature creep thing, but I'm showing this product because it kind of shows how many prioritization meetings look like. So we've got people who are coming, like, we want to do something for bikers, we want to do something for surgeons, we want to do this for that, because there is emerging market somewhere in Africa around this particular space, and this is the direction where we want to go to strategically, so it makes sense to add it. And it's quite difficult to argue if you don't have a product vision and you have no idea what is the direction you're heading to. So, and that's an interesting thing, we can talk about the kind of Conway's law and these kind of things, but if your prioritization meetings are looking like that, there is a fair chance that your product is going to look very much like that as well. Feature creep. Not too much. I was like, yes, I do believe in data. I do believe in data very much. There is a huge difference between data and insights, this journey, data, information, insights, and so on. But something I learned very much in my two previous organizations, so cybersecurity now, genealogy before, family history, is that people don't understand data. People don't understand data. Data literacy is a big problem. And it's not only about statistics, it's about the metrics we use, we look at the things that people don't understand, correlation and causation. And we can have a huge conversation and huge debate of something that does not make sense. But the great thing is that if we are not sure whether there is correlation, causation, we always can run simple experiments, which is a great thing for us. So in terms of future creeps, a few things just to sum up. Well, if we want to change something in the product, the first thing I envision, and I talk with the team, is like, guys, imagine how would you like the behavior of your user to change if you release this feature? It's very much about the outcome. But if I talk to the guys, what do you expect is the outcome, not output, and these kind of things. This is the language that mean loads to me as a product manager, but not so to people. That's how do you believe the behavior of the user will change if we do this particular thing? And if you can't explain how you imagine this will change, this is probably not the way to do that. Or another question is, how would you like the behavior to change and why? And then let's have a different conversation and use tools like impact mapping and figure out what's the best way to achieve something. Another thing is that look at your product as a whole, not only as the priorities you've got in product backlog. So there is a product on the market, and there is a chance that there are like maybe some payment channels that no longer make sense. And we keep them. And we keep them, we are overloading the product because we don't necessarily look at what we have, we don't prioritize what we have, we only look at the things that are in front of us. Another thing is, when we talk about delivering features, it's like choose your customers. Some could say that's an easy thing to say. I was like, no, it's not an easy thing to say, because I also work with very early stage startups. Those who are like evaluating what's their willingness to pay and like getting the initial customers. And it's not an easy thing to say at some point. It's like, dear customer, we are heading this way. Are you heading in the same direction? Is our strategy aligned with your strategy? These are very difficult conversations, and to do that, make sure that you have a very strong and good relationship with your core stakeholders and often also shareholders. But these are important conversations that we need to make, because besides the fact about the product managers need to be good at asking the right questions, we need to be good at making the right decisions at the right time as well. So, experimentation trap, a few things. So why do we experiment? We experiment because we want to learn something. And experimentation usually starts with a question or hypothesis and a few things. And there are a few things that I've seen actually. So because experimentation is kind of, I feel sometimes is these days one of the things that companies do because they don't want to decline, they just want to find a way to achieve something. So I've seen something about like experiment factory, which is like, well, we're going to experiment to actually prove that, well, we are right about something. And I've seen actually the team who's done it for 7 months. Because they got a request from one of their managers saying that, guys, this is the direction we are going. Can you run some experiments to prove this is the right direction? And the problem with some of the direction is that some of the directions are so solution specific, it's very difficult to actually focus on the value. And this one was an extremely solution specific one. So where they got stuck with is like, well, they ran an experiment, they shared the results, and the results were not satisfying because they were not necessarily confirming the point of view of the person who requested this particular series of experiments. And what was needed is to run yet another experiment to find actually the proof that the idea initially made sense. This is a really painful situation to be, and it's extremely manipulative situation to be, because we are experimenting, so we are failing fast. Like, no, this is not really experimenting. If you ever see that, try to break the cycle. Another cycle is, well, we need the answer. So I entered once a meeting, and it was like 11 product managers, and one of the leaders in the company started is, guys, I know that our business is not as fascinating as Google is, but we need to figure out a way to be successful. It's almost a direct quote. And I felt that it's like one of the most demotivating things I've ever heard, first of all. And when they started, they established like an experimentation group. And they started running experiments to figure out what they want, what's the answer. And they were running a series of different experiments just to focus on the answers. didn't necessarily focus on the questions. And we started, well, can we come up with some hypotheses and things and so on? So, no, experiments will tell us. This is not what learning and experimentation is about. And I do value that very much. I'm just showing this kind of cycles just to show if you ever see this kind of cycles, there is something wrong or the product vision does not exist in your company. So, kind of like following up on the keynote, if we talk about experiments, be ready for learning and unlearning. Be ready to be proved that you are wrong in the first place, however your experiment started. So be ready to choose the right tools for the job. I mean, split tests are not the only, split test is not the only way to run experiments. By split testing, you're not necessarily going to experiment and find out how your product is going to be established in a new market. There are so many different ways to actually do product discovery. And another thing is that if you do experiment and try to find out what's not only needed, but also what's feasible. I often find product managers who sometimes don't come from technical background is to be very reluctant to let their teams to experiment with different technologies. But without that, how do we know what is often feasible? And try to find the balance between that. I'm talking about the scale, I'm talking about the whole movement around data science and so on. It's like if you ever worked with data scientists, like there's the one thing that they are great at. They can help you come up with even better questions you have. But they need space. So integrity trap, the last one. So there's a big difference between how we think we create a value and how we are perceived, actually. So by integrity trap, so how is our product perceived in our organization? So I've been in situations, companies with multiple products and heard about this particular product that actually, well, guys, I like working on this one, but this is super boring. I don't like these customers. It's like, this is like, there's a lot of like financial spreadsheet stuff, all this kind of product meetings, this is super boring. If you ever are in this situation, if you're ever managing, leading this kind of product, try to break this cycle. Make people curious about what it is. Because if people who work on the product consider that boring, there is no way that you're gonna actually go after the market and make people interested in the product. The same thing is that how is the product perceived by our customers and market? So the thing is that the way our organization is perceived on the market in terms of how our customer success team is interacting with customers very much has a huge influence on how the product is being perceived. If you look at the Trustpilot and like different kind of comments that people leave over there, is that most of the comments are like, I love this product, these people help me all the time whenever I have questions. So make sure that the way you communicate your product through all the channels, everyone who is actually interacting with users and users is speaking a shared language. And if there is something wrong, make sure that you know that and you have some communication links. So the two things from the product manager's perspective, you can say the culture and brand, these are not necessarily the things that we are responsible for. These are very much the things that we can influence. We can invite people to collaborate on our product and make them more proud, more happy, more motivated around what they do. And the language very much matters. And the boring one is one of the words, is one of the first words that I try to eliminate from any conversation on organizational work. So I like this quote recently published on HBR. That lady, she is very much brand executive managers. And she says that, well, if there's a disconnect between customer experience and employee experience, basically your organization is operating with two sets of values. And the product vision is very much about the value we are creating. If you're ever in this situation that the people who talk in the organization about the product speak a different language than the language that they use when they talk to customers, there is something seriously wrong. And it's not an easy thing to facilitate and change, but it's an essential thing to pursue. So just to sum up, so share the product vision, come up with product vision. This is super important because we do need it and repeat it constantly. Understand how your customers use and choose your products, quantitative and qualitative stuff. These things matter, and share them with everyone so they understand that. Be curious, make other people curious, be an experiment, ask great questions, make decisions at the right time and facilitate, engage your organization in the product life cycle as you often engage your customers in the product life cycle. I hope it was useful. A few kind of things that I wanted to share. If you want to explore the topics from different angles, quite a few books that I can recommend. Yeah, hope you enjoy. Thank you.